Playing white is supposed to be an advantage, but for most beginners, it's right in those first few moves that everything starts to fall apart. By move 6 or 7, your pieces are already hanging and your king's out in the open. So you realize you've kind of lost control of the game without really knowing where it all went wrong. That's exactly why I'm going to show you 3 white openings that you can learn today and start using in your very next game, getting solid results even as a beginner. So yeah, no messing around. I'm Philip. Let's jump right in. The first opening kicks off with c4 as the very first move, and this is probably a move you don't see all that often at the beginner level, so right away you can get a bit of a surprise advantage. The main idea here is still to grab a little control of the center, which is an absolutely basic thing you want to do, and that's why you've also got to know the 3 fundamental rules we follow in the opening. First off, you want to control the center, and that's exactly what this move does, since the center is really just these 4 squares right here in the middle. Second, you want to develop your minor pieces, which are the knights and the bishops, because when you bring them into the game early on, it just makes more sense to get them out first. And third, you want to get your king to safety, which most of the time happens by castling kingside, which means your king ends up nice and protected. So if you just follow these 3 goals in the opening, there's basically no way you're going to make too many mistakes. Now that c4 is on the board, let's take a look at the idea behind this move. Let's say black plays something like knight to f6, which is one of the most common moves you'll see here. And now here comes the next idea, which is to play g3. And the whole point of it is to develop our bishop, getting it nicely placed on g2, and then follow up with knight to f3. And then we're basically all set, because both pieces are already out and we can castle really fast, getting our king pretty much totally safe. So basically, it's a really simple setup where you get your king to safety super fast. Now, let's take the move g6 from black here as an example, where they want to build a similar setup, kind of mirroring ours. So we've got bishop on g2, bishop on g7, and knight on f3, with both sides castle and kingside. And now I just saw d6 come out and answered with b4, which is a solid move too, because it puts a pawn in the center and gives us even more control over the center. So now both pawns are sitting nicely here, and they've grabbed a bit of space, as they say, on top of controlling the center. And our king is safe with the bishop covering it too, while the knight's sitting on a good square. So this is a really safe setup and also super easy to learn. And you can play this way against pretty much anything black throws at you here, but it's worth taking a look at a couple more moves. What would happen if, say, black played e6 here? In that case, we just keep it simple and develop the bishop with bishop to g2. And now they played b5, trying to take our pawn here, but that's really no problem either. This is an idea you might want to keep in mind if you go for this setup, because we just develop the knight and keep going with our structure without really worrying about the fact that the pawn can get taken here. And here's the reason. Because whenever black takes the pawn here, we can use this file for our queen, playing queen to a4 with check. That way, their king is under attack and the pawn's under attack too, so black just can't defend both of them at the same time, meaning we'll win the pawn back right away and the material ends up completely even. On top of that, if black now goes something like knight to c6, we take the pawn and end up with 2 center pawns, and these 2 pawns here can potentially push into the center, while black is left with just 1 center pawn. And just like that, we've already got a slight edge, because it's always important to control the center, the middle of the board. So in other words, taking isn't really a good option for black here. Black might just play bishop to e7, developing a little differently here. And now both sides simply castle kingside. And here too, a lot of the time, you don't really have to defend the pawn, because even if black takes it, that's really not so bad for us. In that case, we go d4 anyway, which is also a typical move you can keep in mind, because it sets up the development of our bishop on c1, which can now come out, while the knight also gets to develop here really nicely. Now, if black takes the pawn, they don't just lose control of the center, since the pawn's no longer in the middle, but this pawn here also gets weak, so we can go after it, hitting it right away with something like knight to e5. And now, the idea might be to go knight to c3 and bishop to f4 again, and now the knight is hitting the pawn right away, so black really doesn't have a good way to defend it anymore. Now, if they play b5 here, the rook would just be hanging, and that's where our bishop here on g2 is also excellent, working like a kind of long-range sniper that just eyes the whole board, which makes it a really strong piece. So we're not really running into any problems here. So this is the first opening setup I'd recommend for you if you're still a beginner, which is the English opening. Nice and easy to learn and simple to play. And with it, you get everything you want, and you develop your pieces while Black is the one who first has to show how they want to play against it. Now, let's move on to the second opening, and this one's the Italian game, one of the openings I really loved playing back when I was a kid, and I liked it because it shows the opening principles super clearly. Here, White plays e4 first, which is also the most common move you'll see at the beginner level, and then comes e5. And even so, this definitely isn't a bad move, because just because beginners play it doesn't mean it's weak. In fact, you'll actually see this move even among the very best grandmasters and the top players in the world. Now comes knight to f3, a classic developing move that brings the knight into play while immediately attacking Black's pawn on e5. And since Black's got to react somehow, knight to c6 is the most natural move here, because with it, Black develops a knight and defends that pawn at the same time. And now we play bishop to c4, developing the bishop and making it more active, which is definitely not a bad square for this piece. So from here, Black basically has two main options that are the most common. One is developing the bishop to c5, and the other is developing the knight to f6. After bishop to c5, we can just go ahead and castle nice and calmly, getting the king to safety, because we've already developed two minor pieces and we've got a little control over the center. So basically, we've already got a really solid position right out of the opening here. This can keep going now with knight to f6, with Black continuing to develop, while d3 protects our pawn, and then comes d6, knight to c3, and then Black castles kingside. And now we can see the positions really symmetrical, but even so, White's got a clear plan here. So the plan here is to bring our dark squared bishop from c1 out to g5. And now we're not just attacking the knight, we're also setting up a pin. A pin is when a piece can't move because if it does, another piece can get taken. And that's exactly what's going on with this knight here. Since the moment the knight moves, we can take the queen, which of course would be a huge win in material for us. So the knight can't move anymore and it's pinned, and this is something you can take advantage of a lot, because when you're the one with a pinned piece, it's usually a pretty uncomfortable spot to be in. So if Black just played something like bishop to d7 here, developing the bishop, we could immediately jump in with knight to d5, and now the knight is already attacking the other knight, while the bishop is hitting the knight too. And that knight can't take either, because then the queen would just get taken by our bishop. So Black might try something like h6, but then we just win right away. And you wouldn't believe how many competitive games I've managed to win on chess.com with this exact idea. The point is, with knight takes on f6 check, the queen can't take because the bishop takes it and we win a whole queen. So that's exactly why the pawn would have to take instead. And now, the pawn on h6 is just hanging. So we take here with the bishop, which immediately goes after the rook, while Black's whole position is already falling apart with the king totally out in the open. Maybe the knight moves away on the next move, but we just bring the queen into the attack. And this is without a doubt a really, really good position for White, one that gives us a ton of winning chances. So this is a really typical idea you can keep in your back pocket and use. And that pretty much wraps up the Italian game. I want to show you one more line with a little trick in it. One you can play if you want to dig a bit deeper into your openings and pick up something new. And this comes up when Black plays knight to f6 here, which is a move we haven't looked at yet. In this position, you can go straight for knight to g5, which at first glance looks a little weird and kind of goes against your natural opening principles, because you're moving a minor piece twice, which is something we normally want to avoid. The actual idea, though, is to immediately hit the pawn here with both the bishop and the knight. So we've got an immediate threat to take there with one of our pieces, and Black can't take back with the king because the other piece is defending it. So if Black just makes any move now, like h6, the knight jumps in and takes on f7, hitting both the queen and the rook. And since they're both worth more than the knight, we're going to win one of those two pieces. This is also called a fork, because the knight attacks both of them at the same time, forking them. And on the next move, we're just going to win material here, since the queen will probably move away and we take the rook, which leaves us in a really good spot. So if you pull this off, you've basically already won, which means your opponents also need to know this position pretty well. And especially at the beginner level, they might just not know the right move here. The best move here is d5, specifically to stop this attack, and it's actually pretty much the only move that works. Now we take the pawn, and here they've got to know the position again, so it's really not that easy to play as Black. And if the knight just takes back now, which it can since it's defended by the queen, we can still go ahead with knight takes on f7, even without the bishop attacking f7 anymore. So now we've got the fork again, and now the king can take us, which is what you think at first. But then comes a really, really strong move, because the queen goes to f3, checked, hitting the knight and the king at the same time. This is exactly the kind of thing I teach my students in Think Ahead, because it's not about memorizing, it's about actually seeing the line and your opponent's possible replies before you even play. And since the only way to defend both pieces is to push the king up into the center with king to e6, you can already see this looks really, really bad for black, because the king is now so exposed in the totally open center that you can just go after it super easily. So right now, we're down a piece as white, but the knight here is already pinned again, so it can't move because otherwise the king would be attacked. So we can immediately go after the knight again by playing knight to c3. And especially at the beginner level, black is never going to manage to hold this position because it's just way too dangerous with the king in the center and the knight getting attacked here, and it's going to be way too tough for them to handle. On top of that, according to the engine, white is actually already better here, and this would be another one of those little trick lines I'd give you as a tip. But here's the thing though, because these tricks only work when you can see what's coming next, when you spot the fork before it even happens. And here's where the real problem shows up. Because the moment your opponent doesn't play along, when they find the right d5 instead of falling for the trick, memorizing won't save you, since there's no memorized line that just solves it, and now you actually have to calculate. If black knows this position, they play knight to a5, and the lines just keep going. So if you really want to dig into this opening, you can go back and take another look at it. And that was our second opening for today, the Italian game, which, along with that trick line, are both great options for you to play at the beginner level. Now, let's move on to our third option, which is the super well-known and popular London system. And it kicks off here with a different first move, because the whole idea is to show you a bunch of flexible options, meaning you've got plenty of possibilities, and you can pick whatever feels right to you. It's that moment where you kind of go, okay, I like this position better. It looks good, it looks harmonious, this is what I want to play. And it all starts with pawn to d4, which is of course a really sensible move that gets played all the time. This move controls the center, and it's already setting up the future development of the light-squared bishop, which means your minor pieces come into the game nicely, and it's just a good move overall. So black will often answer with pawn to d5, and now the bishop goes to f4, which is what really defines the London system. But what's the idea behind putting the bishop on f4, right? Well, white will often follow up with pawn to e3, and that's where the little detail comes in. Because if the bishop stuck around here on c1, and then we push that pawn up one square, it wouldn't be able to get out anymore, and it'd end up trapped, like it's stuck in a box, and that's exactly what we want to avoid. That's why we play bishop to f4 first, and only then pawn to e3. So we can go ahead and develop our pieces with knight to f3 and maybe bishop to e2. And you're going to see pretty soon how we keep building the position from right here. Black could now go knight to f6, and we just follow up with knight to f3. And the only really critical try shows up when black plays pawn to c5, and immediately goes after our pawn on d4. And it's important for you to know at the beginner level that this right here is the critical try. Even then, you just set up with pawn to e3, and after moves like knight to c6, you go pawn to c3, and you build this nice little pawn triangle right here, which is also super easy to remember. These pawns back each other up, because this one defends the pawn on d4, and this one does too. So we've got a really solid, pretty safe position, still with the bishop nicely developed, and then the other bishop comes into the game as well, which means here you really shouldn't run into big problems with white, especially at the beginner level, where your opponent probably won't even know what the critical lines are. The critical move here would be queen to b6, and moves like queen to b3, pawn to c4, and queen to c2 can follow. And this can honestly keep going for quite a while. And there are also some tactical ideas in there. But I don't think you really need to know all this in that much depth at the beginner level, because this structure is already harmonious enough on its own. And if black doesn't play queen to b6 and instead does something like pawn to e6, you can just go ahead and develop your knight to d2 and then follow up with bishop to d6. So whenever your opponent makes this bishop to d6 move, if I were you, I wouldn't want to take, because it develops the bishop and it attacks ours at the same time. And we actually don't want to trade here. We'd rather just pull the bishop back. Now, black might castle, and we play the bishop to e2 or d3 so that you can go ahead and castle as well. And just like that, you've got all your minor pieces in the game. The knight, the bishop, the pawn, nicely protected, and from here, you can bring your king to safety. And you've also got the center under control, which makes this a really excellent alternative, and it's super simple to get the hang of. So that's it. 3 openings you can start playing today. Easy to learn and pretty tough to deal with at your level. But look, remember what I told you, how every opening only takes you up to a certain point. It gives you a solid position and it hands you the tricks, but the second your opponent steps off the script, and trust me, they're gonna, it's not the opening that decides the game anymore. It's what you're actually able to see on the board. And that's exactly what the next video is all about, because I'm going to walk you through the calculation method that pulled me out of this same plateau that's probably holding you back right now. Basically, how to look 2 or 3 moves ahead without getting yourself lost. So click on the video that's popping up on your screen right now. In that video, I reveal 4 steps that organize your calculation in any complex position, a clear system to find the best move without guessing. Click now, because if you stop here, you already know how this story ends. If you enjoyed and learned something new, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.